I must admit, in my experience, obviously it's a very controlled situation for a journalist to meet a musician. The musician is generally on their best behaviour and tries to present the most kind of rounded and humane aspect to their public via the journalist. But on the whole, I found very few musicians who I hand on my heart, I could say, were arrogant and dislikable. As a breed, they seem to be actually quite uncommonly nice.
Yes.
Maybe I'm easily fooled.
I doubt it. I think you probably hit on a very important thing. But it's true. So many people I meet, they're very shy. Very, very shy, even in their own situation, in their own concert situation, backstage and so forth. They do have an air of, who me? Is this all for me? Which is very reassuring.
I mean, presumably this is a paradox which you've been, people have put to you on numerous occasions, and that is, how can someone so retiring, so reclusive, and so forth, yet be such a self-confident, and expansive, and bold performer?
Well, I think if you have it within you that the situation is there to exercise it very easily, but in another way it's actually a good question. It's a good question.
I talked to Neil Tennant of the Pet Shop Boys about a year ago, and as one does after the sort of tape stops running and just chatting, we're packing things together, about to go. He's obviously he's been a pop journalist as well, so he thinks about these things kind of from an objective viewpoint too. He says that pop stardom for him and others who he has met is very much, it's not exactly a revenge against your peers and background, although it can often be quite simply that. But it's in general it's a leapfrogging of an immediate problem regarding your self-esteem. With George Michael, his problem with self-esteem was that he was fat.
Yes.
And it was easier for him to be a pop star than to lose weight, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
And Neil Tennant wasn't going to tell me, whether that applied to him or if so, how. Obviously one can look at your story and see it is that your kind of reclusiveness as a teenager is precisely something which you would, through an effort of will, kind of, as it were, exorcise.
Well, eloquently put, yes. With me it was a major sense of being overlooked. And also an intensified shyness, yet a desperation to do it. Like somebody who really wants to sing, but just prays that nobody asks them to sing. Very confusing. But revenge initially was also a strong element for me, because in a meek way I had tried for many years to do something quite useful and quite visible, and I had always found it so hard because nobody ever wanted to help me, and nobody ever wanted to take my calls, and so forth. How
do you mean? Could you be specific here?
Well, whether it be breaking into music journalism or trying to form a group. I remember once, a long time ago, somebody in the NME slamming the phone down when I called them, and that just seemed to be like the last straw in a bucket of many, many straws. And that, it did see me under for quite a while, but not entirely. But largely the sense of being overlooked. Yet to say that now, it seems almost childish to suggest that that is possibly the basis of one's career. It certainly isn't. I do enjoy every aspect of what I do, which is making the record.
And do you feel fulfilled in the sense? Good point, obviously, is if it was merely the motivation for revenge,
that would be stupid.
Having achieved that revenge, then presumably there must be something else. I'm going to take Marilyn Monroe. If she was overlooked and generally abused and unloved as a child, but then having found the recognition that would be the revenge upon her childhood, then she had it, so she might as well retire. But obviously she found within herself, an ability she had to express, and presumably a continuing desire to see that ability applauded.
Yes.
Presumably just to prove she still had it.
Yes. Even to prove perhaps that she actually had friends.
Yeah.
Possibly that basic.
Now, without saying that you are Monroe-esque, is the thing is that the famous performers, are they actually significantly different? Do they all have a sort of almost like a common story, if you boil it down, which is different from most people who haven't felt that overwhelming urge to perform?
Well, I think there are so many mountainous myths surrounding performing, surrounding recording, surrounding being on television, as you know. And those myths don't seem to collapse. And people do assume that if you're engaged in the entire whirlwind of performing and recording, that you are, surrounded by people, surrounded by friends, enormously rich, the world is at your fingertips, you move with ease, you have enormous freedom and the pick of the crowd and so forth, which has never ever been true in my case, and is not true in the case of the performers that I personally know. I can phone up certain people who are, if you like, famous, if you want to talk and describe it in those terms, and I can call them every Monday night at the same time, at 8 o'clock, and they're there, and they're sitting at home, and they're quite frustrated, and they want to go out and meet people, and they want to make friends and so forth, but it's very, very hard. Yet they sell enormous amounts of records.
Now, what this cliche about being lonely at the top. Now, is it really true that if they went out on that Monday night, they really simply couldn't go down to the pub or go to the cinema or do a number of things where you're in public, but yet you are enjoying yourself without necessarily wishing to meet in that public? Would it be just impossible for them?
It becomes slightly impossible because of the method of approach of, if you like, the public. In those situations you can't make friends with people and you can't get to know people. It takes a long time. It takes a very long time to get to know people and be friends with them. And if you're walking down the road and suddenly there's somebody beside you talking to you who you don't know, whom you've never met, yet they know you, and they know what they want to say and they want an instant reaction from you, it's very, very difficult. And personally, I just begin to clam up because I'm walking in a semi-daydream, and then suddenly there's a face and they're talking to me, and they know me, and it's slightly intimate, but obviously I don't know them, and I can't judge them. It takes me a long time to judge them. And I think sometimes people become confused by a lack of response. But it's an alarmingly unnatural situation. And even though you could go out with an aim to meet some people and to have a good time, it isn't that easy. It isn't that easy when you're in a situation where that other person conceivably knows everything, whether intimately or professionally about you, and you know nothing about that person. And that person seems to have very strong views on you and your life.
So even if you're invited by a friend to a party, everybody will know who you are, and that actually makes it kind of the pleasure of finding out about people and gaining their friendship if you have enough in common. It destroys that immediately because it's so one-sided, the initial contact.
It destroys it because the other person obviously instantly has a great deal up on you, if you like. The situation is very unbalanced, and that makes it difficult. Sometimes I feel that the only friends the performers can really have are other performers, but then there's that strange jealousy thing, and that strange air of competition that creeps in.
Do you feel it yourself, or have you observed others having that jealousy towards you, what you do? Is it a jealousy about popularity or about ability, or some mixture of the two?
It could be either. I've never felt it because I've always been perfectly happy with my status, and I think it's very respectable, and I think it's very useful. So I've never wanted to be the biggest performer in the world. I've never wanted to be part of the global pop aristocracy. Never. I've never wanted to play Wembley. So I've always been very happy with what I have in that sense.
Have you ever character I quite like Bob Dylan. It seems so much of his sort of public appearances, and indeed so much of his art, if you like, seems to indicate an acute awareness of his public, to the point where it seems to me that he will perversely do something which may go even against his better artistic wishes, merely to put a distance between himself and his public. Have you ever felt any sense of doing something other to cock a snook, or just to unburden yourself of a little bit of responsibility they put on your shoulders?
Not really, because with the letters I receive, there is the opinion is so varied of my standing and where I should go and what I should do. A lot of people write to me and just say, stop, please don't make another record, and seal the entire situation. A lot of people write to me and say, please continue, make as many records as possible. So in a sense, it's not really possible to please one's audience exclusively, obviously. And I think it's foolish to try. And also, I think when you reach that stage where your audience begins to dictate or to feel that they have a whole, that you are slightly lost. In a larger sense, you should take people with you, and you should convince people, and you should have the power to convince.
Changing the subject, absolutely. Sorry, you're getting short of time or something.
I don't think so. It's only 5 to 5.
Yeah, good. When we were sitting around at my magazine, thinking of some various angles to come at you, because obviously if somebody's quite interviewed quite a lot, it's a great danger of actually boring you, and therefore in the end boring our readership. Because trying to come up with some new things, such as you were a sportsman.
If you were a toffee apple, what colour would you be?
No, yeah. Well, we do think of the Smash's terms because a lot of Smash's people, but it's this thing about for such a kind of a reclusive, slightly sort of old-fashioned.
You're apologising. Just get on with it.
No. I'm just trying to find a proper way of framing this question, because it seems so trivial, and that is a pride you take in your body. The disrobing of your shirt, the way you quite like being photographed shirtless. You shave your armpits, things which seem a little bit odd.
Very natural. I mean, surely you do the same.
No one's. I don't think I've ever shaved my armpits.
Well, you don't know what you're missing.
And I was just, it's not really a question apart from a remark. It's what is the motivation of this?
Just extreme physical beauty, obviously. But surely you realise that.
You look better with shaven armpits than.
Well, your question is so basic that it becomes hard to answer. Why did you shave your armpits? Is that the question?
Yes.
I found it very fascinating. I did it for a long time.
Before being photographed?
Yes, I did it for a long time. I did it all through the Smiths' career. And I still do it occasionally.
Is this something you just did on a whim at first, and then got quite used to the idea?
Yes, I can't remember how it started. I can't remember how it began. I don't think there's any great mystical response or mystical reasoning behind it.
Did you shave your legs as well?
No, never.
Why not legs?
Well, I suppose if I shaved them, you would have said, why did you shave your legs?
Well,
This is one of those circular questions.
it's a circular question, but you know, like girls, they shave their armpits and their legs and their
Not all.
bikini area and all
But
that.
not
kind of
all
stuff.
of
No, not
them.
all of them do, but certainly most of the ones I know do, and it's a sort of a it's an automatic thing in the same way as most men shave their faces.
Yes, it's reasonably as automatic as that.
Yes, I mean it's a socialised sort of part of one's beauty care or whatever.
Thank you. Well, I don't really know what the question is.
Well, no, I've explained why. I've explained why.
Yeah.
And I suppose what it is that by appearing on front covers of newspapers with your arms up in the air, you're making a point. Now,
Not necessarily.
is a point simply so that people ask?
No, not at all. I mean, this is the first time anybody's asked, and I'm very embarrassed. It's not particularly to make a point. Curious winds of interest. And not even a matter of taking oneself that seriously and trying to project a fascinating pop image. Not at all. I quite liked the shape. The fact that I had shaven armpits was coincidental. Well, you won't believe that.
You actually enjoy the sensation of shaving?
Facial shaving? No, I hate it. I really hate it, but I always do it. I never go a day without shaving. No, I hate it.
But did you say you actually quite like the sensation of shaving your armpits but not of your face?
No, I didn't say that.
Sorry.
No, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
I can't remember what I said. I'm surprised that it should be of any faint interest to me.
I suppose it's simply because you think you appeared on a couple of covers like so, and it's what's caused people's imaginations.
But it had a strangely serene quality to it. It had a smoothness to it.
Just kind of looking at your sort of body and you as it hadn't been, since you were whatever, 13 or something.
What?
It was smooth and unhairy.
Unhairy? Well, I had to shave when I was 13, which I think that's quite reasonably young, isn't it? Yes. I had to shave when I was 13, and I do have not sort of a 5 o'clock shave, but a 2 o'clock shave. Fascinating question. But no, I've never shaved my legs.
We're getting down here, as you can see, to the real smaller questions. I know this has been gone into before, but have you, upon reflection, have you reflected upon this kind of acrimonious split with Stephen Street? Has it been kind of sorted out? Is the situation resolved?
I don't think it can ever be resolved because his manager also managed me, and I sacked her, and she continues to manage him. And his lawyer was my lawyer until I dismissed him. So therefore Stephen's surrounded by people who really are quite happy to make life as difficult as possible for me.
Yeah.
So therefore my relationship with him is completely destroyed because of that. But I will survive.
Pet Shop Boys and Dusty Springfield, they've done something which you've done with Sandy Shaw. Do you like the music? Do you like the idea behind it? Do you think they've caught something of her well?
No, I don't. But I think I much prefer the Liza Minnelli situation. I think Losing My Mind is a very good record. I think the Dusty thing has failed for me because of Dusty, not because of the Pet Shop Boys. I never sensed that Dusty totally believed in the situation herself.
I believe she's doing it again. Is it sort of another crack at it? I mean, was it just the same, was it?
Well, nothing has been proved.
Yes, and then it was her first one, wasn't
What
it?
have I done to deserve
Yeah.
this? Yeah.
So she seems to be coming back to the same punishment. Maybe it's because she had big hits.
Yes, I think it could be that. But for some reason, I don't think the marriage seems terribly natural. I might be wrong, I probably am wrong, but to the naked eye, it doesn't seem totally natural.
So I want to keep going back about Pet Shop Boys.
Okay.
It's just, there does seem to be a kind of an analogy between you to do with there's kind of fairly ambiguous or northern reactions to the sort of the glamour and the myth of metropolitan London, London of the 60s, and the way that kind of fallout continues to percolate culturally, as it were, everywhere else. So I suppose it's a sort of simple question is that, do you feel an affinity with them? Do you understand where they're coming from?
No, not really. I've met Neil and he's a terribly nice person, but the music travels over my head. So, not really, not musically at all. I can recognise Neil as being an intelligent person, as being a useful addition to the whole throng of popness. But I wouldn't say I was an unbudgeable fan.
I know these are very general questions.
I don't mind.
This business, when you started off, sorry. I feel like a government inspector.
You sound like somebody in a corner shop. It's just a little bit of gossip about a broken milk bottle.
When the group started off, and you started giving interviews, presumably you must have either just before or actually during the interview processes defined what it was, what your values were, and what you set yourself up both for and against. Especially this idea of standing up in opposition to mainstream rock values. Do you find that position in any way hard to maintain now that you're so much a part of the mainstream flow?
Well, I find it impossible to maintain for one reason, and that reason is because everything I ever wanted to say in an interview situation I've said, and I've said it very clearly and I've said it very often, and so therefore interviews become harder for me because inevitably the only thing to do is become slightly repetitious. So therefore I don't do many interviews, and I felt that within the last few interviews I gave, and to some extent even during this interview, your face has just gone ashen, that I simply don't respond in a very alert manner anymore. It's not because I've become less interested in talking, but it's simply because I'm so conscious of, because obviously one only has one life and one only has one background, and if, like me, your life hasn't drifted enormously away from how it was pre-Smiths, then one is basically still the same person. And becoming repetitious and becoming labouring certain well-worn points is obviously not to be done.
There's a book that Murray has, you probably have it, Morrissey in his own words. This is sort of, this is a joke that omnibus put out. And Murray has apparently his bedside reading, and I thought it was extremely funny because a lot of stuff I don't think I wrote before at the time, but sort of seeing it sort of collected and the pithy quotes taken out of their original context, and yet they still have that aphoristic zest about them.
Yes.
This seems to indicate, because perhaps when I play the tape back, indeed it will be quite wildy. At the time, though, I've not been falling around the floor. I've actually been quite interested because it seems seriously engaged and sort of thoughtful about what you said.
Yeah.
You haven't been hitting me with the zingers.
No.
Now, is it because you are essentially, the subject matter has been so rehearsed in interviews and in your mind, is that you just don't feel able to come up with that fresh phrase as you would when one does think about something for the very first time?
No, I think it is simply because I have said so much. And I have said all I wanted to say. And I could easily sit here today and I could destroy Margaret Thatcher and could go on to the royalty bit, as we almost nearly did. And I could complain endlessly about the government, but I think it simply becomes boring. It does become boring. And I think I've reached a point where I feel that if people want to know about me, they can listen to the records, and I can explain as much as I want to explain about my life in those records. Because, for instance, the last interview I did was too trivial, and everything was a joke, and so forth. So, I feel that interviews have to be very few and far between now.
Presumably, is that you set the agenda of any interview you might give simply by the nature of your last record. It'll raise points, meet his murder, Dean's dead, and so forth. Perhaps those points haven't been as evident in your more recent records. Is that simply because there's nothing that you feel sufficiently strongly about to pronounce to the world at large what's on your mind?
Well, I think the last three singles, including Ouija Board, Interesting Drug, and the last of the famous International Playboys, have been very topical records. But previous to that, I think the solo album and the records, the immediate singles, were perhaps less topical.
Now, when you say topical, am I wrong in that? Where's the topicality of Ouija Board? And is that surely it's topical only for you?
Well, it's also topical in the sense that nobody's ever sang about a Ouija board, nobody's ever discussed it in the history of pop music. And I think to find a new theme, and hopefully to put it in the top 40, is in itself, in 1989, reasonably extraordinary. Because name one fresh theme in the top 40 at the moment.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly, yeah, right. And also, yes, it's I suppose, not exactly topic, because it's not as if it's in the air, it's not as if it's an issue.
Well, it's discussable. I mean,
Yeah.
it's actually illegal to have a Ouija board, which makes it faintly discussable. These days it's illegal. You can't actually buy them anywhere. And I know there's one MP who's constantly badgering on about seances and so forth, and linking it with Satanism and all the usual jargon that MPs who want a huge public profile go on with.
Do you expect that we will shortly hear from them once your record has got some publicity?
I hope not.
When it does, almost inevitably, you're going to get some bright spark on the newspaper saying, I know this MP, let's phone him up for a quote.
Well, yes, but it was tried even with the last of the famous International Playboys, which had very strong lyrics, and newspapers telephoned Morrissey and so forth, and it seemed as though something was going to begin. I think generally they feel perhaps if we do ignore him, he will after all go away.
Although is there not quite a shortage of controversy about pop stars at the moment, and therefore that you might well sort of step into the breach to the satisfaction of...
Well, I don't want to. I don't want to be splattered all over the Daily Mirror in a negative sense. I'd much rather be splattered all over the Daily Mirror in a very positive sense, as I feel I should be. So I don't court controversy. It's just that the way I feel and the themes that I want to pursue and the way I want to approach making records, particularly singles, is not a very common feeling within people who make records. It just isn't. I seem to be slightly off the beam, but happily so. Happy to be off the beam.
Do you ever have you ever thought of making almost like an issue or not exactly a protest record, but a record which is specifically linked to an issue of the day about which you feel you must have to say?
Well, certainly that was done with Meta's murder. At the moment, I don't feel any burning political. I obviously feel very strongly about certain political things, but it's a question of whether certain themes translate well in the context of a pop song and also in the context of a pop lyric. And most people can't seem to do that. They try to introduce political aspects to their record and it doesn't work because there's either no song or no chorus or no tune or the music's appalling. I think it's very hard to combine political messages with rousingly interesting records, rousingly good tunes. It's very hard.
Do you ever feel any sort of ambiguity where you may take a character, for example, I think you once said you're more who yet has status and a kind of publicity clout, to be able to draw attention to something which would seem to be wholly supportable, namely the preservation of the rainforest.
Yeah, which is encouraging, but he also draws attention to the fact that he's bored stiff. And I think he's bored stiff. He seems bored with his career, he seems bored with making music, he seems bored with rainforests. I think sometimes it's useful, but unfortunately it's now become so common, causes within music have become so common that I think the record has to be incredibly good in order to prove that the political cause is useful. Unfortunately, look at the Spirit of the Forest, which had enormous publicity, certainly on the radio, and sold 12 copies.
And in a slightly kind of wider context, I still Sting related. The Amnesty International tour of last year. I know you kind of hinted, I think, that you feel that when pop stars do something for charity or for something other than the furthering of their careers, you feel a bit suspicious about it.
Yes, I do.
Do you think it actually really matters very much if there is in fact a little bit of spin-off to the pop star's advantage in the context of the greater good their involvement might mean?
I don't think it matters if there's a little bit of spin-off, but I generally find that it's a very huge, strangulating spin-off, and that the records are bad anyway, and I'm not trying to be funny. How many stroke political cause records do you enjoy? Do you put on your turntable every night?
There's one I really liked on music. I thought Free Nelson Mandela was good. I think it had a good chorus. Well, I suppose it could have said a number of, I just like the sound of it.
Well, it was definitely a song.
I mean, obviously from somebody like us who is immersed in pop music, perhaps we have just got a bit of a tunnel vision about it. In some ways, of course, there are things a great deal more important than pop music, although to try and imagine that something which has given us so much pleasure could be relatively unimportant compared to political prisoners or rainforests or whatever. I mean, yes, on paper it is, but it doesn't feel so, because rainforests are so distant, aren't they?
Well, they are very distant, but obviously they can and will and now do. The absence of rainforests have an effect on the fact that the sun is coming through this window at the moment.
But also some might say that, row a lot more greenhouse effect.
Well, not really, because in 5 years your skin will be magenta.
Yes, that's true, but who thinks 5 years ahead?
Nobody. That's why it's so tiresome when you watch local television and everybody's really happy because the greenhouse effect, etc. I find it so boring. But I think it's obviously a prelude to total disaster, and people don't realise it, and weather forecasters won't admit it. So no, I was very nervous this summer. Very nervous because obviously it was the beginning of the greenhouse effect. But really, I think the world is winding down generally, in every sense. I think the demise of the elephant is really the demise of the human race. And if they go, we will follow it. I think there's no doubt about that. But it's also emphasises a total decline in basic human standards. And I fail to see how the world can ever improve or be a harmonious place or be a happier place. It's not possible. Not possible at all.
In that sense, does that put that as such great cosmic pessimism? It's sort of
not necessarily. I mean, I read The Guardian occasionally. I know what's happening in the world.
I suppose it makes your position within it. I suppose it makes everybody's personal concerns really quite beside the point, doesn't it? It's like
it does, but I can't help feeling that, to me and to those people to whom pop music is the most important thing in the world, pop music is the most important thing in the world. It's extremely important to me and never ceases to be so, even though quite largely I feel anger towards it and frustration and the usual things. That's positive. But I feel that when I hear of people losing limbs, that is the time when I feel that much of the things that concern me in a problematical way are trivial, obviously.
Is that? It sounds like one of those kind of religious time interviews,
Well,
face to faith or something like that.
Just call me Tammy.
When you're feeling really blue, do you ever think about sort of limbless people and starving children, and that sort of not exactly cheers you up?
Even counting your own blessings, that can become really boring and frustrating and so forth. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. When I'm depressed, which is very often, I remain depressed, and there's very little I can do about it, and I don't come away from that depression until it leaves me by its own accord almost. But I also find that for at least 1 week of every month, that most people I know are plunged in unswayable depression. So at least I realise that there's nothing terribly wrong anymore with being depressed, but it is a very common thing.
Are you, when you get depressed, do you cease contacting your friends because you don't want to burden them with your, mopes?
No, I call them perhaps even more, and we just quite literally exchange our feelings, and they're generally quite mutual.
I read a thing about seasonally affective depression. Do you know anything about that? It's been now isolated, a thing called seasonally affective depression, which is based on the pineal gland, which is a sort of tiny thing, I suppose, like a sort of tiny chili, is located at the very big centre of your brain, and there was, I believe, Dutch anatomist in the 17th century thought it was the third eye, some sort of centre of consciousness, and almost in a sense they were onto something.
Yeah.
What it does, it regulates the flow of hormones and other things around your body and responds to light, and so it puts you into this sort of into the seasonal rhythms that say animals have, and that is that they slow down and hibernate in winter or whatever. And human beings, to an extent, are like that as well, to do with conservation of energy and so forth. Some people's pineal glands are particularly sensitive, almost super sensitive, which means that when light begins to fail in the autumn, they will tailspin into profound depressions where they will without being able to isolate a cause for this depression in their lives, they will respond, of course, in that rather panicky way, and they will do things. They'll sleep far more. They will eat huge amounts of chocolate because that contains apparently something which is antidepressant. So they will sort of balloon out, and their complexions will go, and that will make them even more depressed.
Yes.
And
that's exactly how I go.
well, in that case, perhaps the ultraviolet screen is the thing for you if you get this particularly in winter. All you have to do is to sit in front of it for, I suppose, 6 hours a day. For me, 6 hours a day, and the spectrum of light is not, I believe, a carcinogenic spectrum, but it zooms into your pineal gland, which sends around the right hormones, and cheers you up immensely.
What do you buy it?
You can buy it. There's a society called the Seasonally Affective Depressant Society. They're known as SADS. That's the acronym.
Oh my God!
And they will send information, including the DIY kit of what gear to get and how to assemble it, and to sort yourself out. And of course, there's sort of helplines and social events and things like that. I'd never heard of this thing before. We've got people remarking that they feel a bit low sometimes when the winters, when the lights start coming in.
Any comments on it?
Give me the number.
Yes. Honorary member.
Yeah. Probably me. So, shall I have a quick just gander down here, make sure I've covered it. I was going to ask you whether I want to express an interest. I think it's because you were so annoyed at local politics in Manchester, of ever turning your attention to the cause, to some particular issue or cause to do with your hometown.
Yes. Well, what's the question?
Well, I don't know whether you would ever consider standing for some sort of local.
I wouldn't
last.
I really wouldn't last. I think I'm far too gentle to become involved in politics. Really, I think if you're sensitive and you're a generally kind person, you can't go into politics. You don't survive. But no, I wouldn't be terribly interested, to be honest. I get very angry about Manchester because it seems much as it ever was, which is neglected and quite a sorrowful place. But I don't think I'd personally become involved in local politics.
Having now moved back to Manchester from London, do you expect to sort of bounce like a ping pong ball between the two cities?
Well, it does become necessary, and I do have a lot of friends in London, which makes it interesting to me. I have a lot of friends in Liverpool also, which makes Liverpool a very interesting place. But as you know, most people who come from Manchester have this slight burden of the north-south divide issue, which can become very tedious. But sometimes you can see the differences very clearly, very plainly, and you can become quite defensive about your own hometown.
Since, presumably, you must only have started coming down to London regularly from 1982 or 3 onwards.
That's right, yes.
Has it either kind of eroded or cemented any prejudices or impressions that you had before?
Well, I have a very warped impression of London because I stay in very nice hotels. I don't really see London in an average or normal sense. I don't see normal London life. I'm slightly cushioned from that. So I wouldn't really feel that the views I have about living in London and working in London could be very clear or useful.
Do you think in the last few years is that antagonism in Manchester and perhaps in the north of England in general has heightened towards London and the south east?
Yes, I think it has, and I think it does when Manchester produces particularly good groups. There is a general swell of pride, and quite naturally they feel very powerful.
Formerly with factory records, at least being a focus for this.
I don't think it's needed or required, really. I don't think my involvement in factory is particularly necessary. They've got someone on the switchboard, so Not really. If I do something, it would be quite separate.
I mean, do you feel that because you're so identified with Manchester, it doesn't really matter if you are assigned to a national record company, which means inevitably a London record company, even though it's in Manchester Square?
Right, no, that doesn't matter at all. Obviously that doesn't matter at all, because the audience that I have and the audience that the Smiths had extended beyond on the local boundaries. It's a national audience. I think it's a slightly different situation if a Manchester group with no audience, who is slightly untested, begins their career on a record label in London. I think that's slightly different. In fact, I know it is. And I find that the local people, the local audiences within Manchester are less willing to support groups. I think it's more acceptable if you build within Manchester. You begin within Manchester and you gain your local following. And you break up.
Have you found since performing live that your attitude to other live performers and the problems involved has changed?
Yes, it has. I've become more critical because I realise that for very large, very wealthy artists, it's a very simple thing to do. Especially if you're in a huge venue and you don't have any contact with your audience and there's this huge barrier. It's just so simple. I mean, I accidentally saw Bros on television the other night, live at Wembley or somewhere, and I found it very sad to watch it. Very sad to watch their performance. And even though I can turn off and I can say, well, they were obviously always intended to be in that kind of a group anyway, they were intended to be those kind of people, the entire mechanics of the show I thought were depressingly structured, depressingly modern, depressingly industry.
And so you don't feel there's any particular stress on them as performers, which would perhaps make you more tolerant of them?
Well, I think
they're only young lads.
Yeah,
so.
everybody has their own stress, I suppose. Everybody has their own stress, but I think you can very quickly and very easily reach a point where performing is very easy. And certainly if you have an audience who are prepared to applaud regardless, which unsurprisingly most massive artists do, there's very little for the artist to actually do by way of a performance. I think it helps to have severe critics, because the critics are the ones who make the whole thing move on. And without critics it becomes quite stagnant.
Have you found this to be true in your own case? I mean, have you?
No.
Has criticism ever kind of made you think, yes, that's absolutely right, I'll stop doing this and do that instead?
No, I've never felt that. I've sometimes felt that they have a vague, twisted, semi-visible point. But I've never felt, oh yes, I should begin to wear those clothes now. I've never felt that.
It just seems to contradict the last point you made.
Oh, why?
That you feel that only critics, or I suppose maybe what we're doing is arguing that with critics as people with a critical viewpoint rather than professional critics.
Yeah.
Do you yourself find that if you play against an audience who are not 100% fans, this brings out a better performance? So play to an audience of the curious.
Right. Which obviously I've never done. Oh well, it happened once actually with the Smiths at Glastonbury, where there were some hostilities, and there was some unhappy faces in the audience. But I never at the time I never felt it was particularly the Smiths' fault. I mean, obviously with such an event like that, you're bound to get herds of different breeds stuck together.
Yeah, I mean, it's just to go sort of ploughing back to this point, was whether you were one of these people who you feel that other groups could usefully do with, and that is to have an audience which was not automatically terribly eager to be pleased. I've not put that very clearly.
No, I don't understand it at all.
Right. Let me rephrase that. Is that you feel that many acts suffer because their audiences are unquestionably enthusiastic. Your audience has always, by one occasion, been unquestionably enthusiastic, or certainly very enthusiastic indeed.
Certainly very enthusiastic. Yeah.
Have you ever felt that to be a lack of a challenge, or to present a lack of challenge?
I've never felt it to be, but I could see it becoming so. As a solo artist, I haven't toured. I've only played one concert. So therefore, the last time I toured England was in 1986, which was 3 years ago. I could imagine it very easily if one ever did a world tour, which I've never done, which the Smiths have never done. The Smiths never really even played in Europe. But I think if you get on that roustabout, or that roundabout, everything becomes mechanical. Penetrating eyes.
Sorry.
Get the screen. Erect the screen. I'll pass you notes underneath it.
Sorry, I don't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. Presumably that was by accident more than design, is it? So you simply didn't.
Not really.
Is that
no.
so? You simply felt that you have a kind of a natural limit in how many shows you want to do in one kind of go, or how far you're prepared to travel, and how far you're prepared to be away from home.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And you knew what that was without having to find yourself stranded in Poughkeepsie or something in 3 weeks before getting back and feeling miserable.
Well, it's a question of making records, continuing to make records, or going out and touring the world. And the choice within the Smiths was always to make as many records as possible.
Have you ever consciously thought about staging from time to time performances which are more than performances, event-style performances such as Wolverhampton was, to give you an edge, to kind of put you back in touch with your most die-hard fans, or something, apart from anything else, to test out new material, all the sorts of many reasons you might have?
Yes, I do think about that occasionally. I do feel as though I want to do something unusual in the event of playing live. I just don't want to organise a set of very secure, very safe dates. I do want to do something unusual, hence the delay in actually performing. I'm not entirely sure as yet what that is. I'm not entirely sure what the move is. But I just don't want to mechanically tour.
Did you see the Pet Shop Boys when they played live with singers, dance and screens and whatnot? No. Have you any idea of any sort of quite grand staging of that order?
Have I any idea?
Have you ever toyed with the idea
Oh,
of
no,
doing
not
it
at all.
yourself?
No, I mean, always a sense of total minimalism.
Would that mean, did you see Lou Reed when he played in London?
No.
Sort of quite a small band. Did you see Tin Machine?
Don't be silly. No.
So you don't fancy a back to the basics?
Well,
You and 3 guys hammering it out.
Yes, I do actually. But I don't think I ever left, as you say, the basics. I mean, that's the way that I had always performed, obviously within the Smiths, and then on the Wolverhampton thrash, it was just 4 group members once again. So, less is more, I think. I don't like grandiosity in that sense. I don't like the sense of theatre that many people try to achieve. I prefer thrashed out emotions.
Thrashed out, fleshed out, thrashed out emotions.
Well, I couldn't say it again. Yes. Skin against nails. That's
that sounds like a payoff line,
preferably your skin, not mine. I just had an all-over shave.
No, it's
Yes, I know. If you were a toffee apple, what colour would you be?
Well, no, mum is like this. It's always by way of a courtesy question. I can't think of anybody who's ever given me a sensible answer either, and that is, sometimes it occurs to me there are people who actually do go into an interview, and they really do want to say something, but they never get asked the right question. Is there a question which I should have asked, or rather, is there an answer that you would like? Is there something that you would like to say? Is there something you feel I really should know about at the moment?
So there's actually 5 questions I've got to
Well, no, it's one question. It's just 7 different ways of looking at it.
Brian Walden. Right, so is there an answer I wanted to give that I haven't given? Is there a question that you haven't asked?
Basically, is there something that you want to say, but put like that, it's as if you're saying, well, buy Daz or vote Conservative,
Yes.
or do you know what I mean?
Right, and there's also there's a staged element to it, isn't there?
Yes.
As if I came in here secretly trying to remember certain Dickensian paragraphs.
Well, there is that, but sometimes there is. You know, there's something on your mind which actually, for fans and other people, that you may want to have said.
Well, I think
nobody thought to ask.
I think I regret how we discussed dealing with interviews and dealing with my position in interviews, because I don't think I was quite clear about my feelings towards interviewers and towards alert responses and repetition and so forth. But I suppose if I'm going to be really truthful, I suppose I haven't quite worked that out. I haven't quite worked the explanations out and the feelings towards being interviewed. So that much at least I can say.
Yeah.
The other part of the question is there something that I'd like you to ask me? I suppose that when you ask this to people, they always say no, and you turn the tape off and you go and catch your bus.
Exactly what happens.
Well, it's one of those questions, isn't it? It's one of those very important questions. It's like saying, it's one of those questions like, when would you have most liked to have lived? What
Yes.
period would you have most liked to
Which
live?
historical character would it have been?
Yes, which is a question which most people must have a response, but they don't necessarily give it, and so therefore I'm not.
Would you like some tea?
Yes, I think so, with a